Heal me, and I'll free your mother, the judge mocked. But when a desperate child accepted his cruel bargain, the impossible didn't just happen, it changed them both. You're a cold man, said the 10-year-old girl, her blonde braid trembling as she faced the most powerful judge in the county. But I can fix you. Before her sat Judge Arthur Vance, a man carved from grief, confined to his wheelchair since the crash that took his wife. He was ready to sentence the girl's mother, a maid who had stolen $400 to buy the medicine keeping her alive. Heal me, the judge mocked, and I'll free your mother. No one laughed. Not when the child answered, steady and sure. I will. That moment changed everything. This isn't just a story about a desperate girl or a broken man in a chair. It's the story of how faith met reason, and one promise rewrote them both. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. Enjoy the story. A 10-year-old girl stared down the most powerful man in the county. The courtroom was so quiet, the sound of a tear landing on the wooden floor could be heard. You are a cold man, the girl said, her voice clear and strong. But I can fix you. Every person in the packed room held their breath. They watched the small girl with the neat, blonde braid. Her shoes were worn, but her simple blue dress was clean. She stood directly in front of the judge's massive, imposing bench. Behind that bench sat Judge Arthur Vance. Judge Vance was a man carved from cold granite. His dark suit was worth more than the girl's mother made in 6 months. His graying hair was perfectly combed. He sat in a motorized wheelchair, a high-backed throne of leather and steel. It had been his prison for 3 long years. In 25 years on the bench, he had seen murderers, thieves, and liars. He had seen grown men weep and powerful men beg. But he had never, ever been addressed this way. He had certainly never been addressed this way by a child. The girl's small shoes had made a tiny squeak, 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 on the polished floor as she'd walked up. She had slipped away from her great-aunt in the front row. Now, she placed her small hands on the base of his desk. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. Her eyes were a shocking, bright blue. They held no fear, only a strange, unsettling certainty. She took a small breath. Judge, sir, she said. Her voice did not tremble. My mama is a good person. She's just sick. If you let her go home, I promise I will make your legs work again. The silence shattered. The courtroom erupted. People gasped. A few people let out a sharp, surprised laugh. Whispers flew around the room like angry bees. Did you hear her? That's Emily Rawlings' girl. The maid who stole. What a circus. The child is delusional. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious man named Owen Fields, shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is an absurdity. I must ask that the child be removed. But Judge Vance did not laugh. He did not look at the prosecutor. He stared at the 10-year-old girl. A strange, painful feeling pulsed in his chest. It was a feeling he had not felt in years. He thought he had buried it. He raised one hand. The courtroom slowly, painfully, fell silent again. And what? The judge's voice was a low, cold gravel. Is your name? Grace, sir. Grace Rawlings. Grace, he repeated. The name felt like ash in his mouth. You have made a very serious claim. A very impossible claim. It's not impossible, Grace said simply. You just think it is. Judge Vance looked past her. He looked at the defendant's table. There sat Emily Rawlings, Grace's mother. She was pale, her eyes red from crying. She wore a drab, oversized county jumpsuit. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. She was shaking her head, whispering, No, Grace, no. Stop. Emily's story was painfully simple, and Judge Vance hated simple, sad stories. 3 weeks earlier, Emily Rawlings was just a mother trying to survive. She worked as a maid for Mrs. Eleanor Bishop, one of the wealthiest women in the city. Emily cleaned a house with 12 bedrooms and 9 bathrooms. She lived in a 2-room apartment. Her husband had left years ago. It was just her and Grace. Emily had a weak heart. The doctors called it cardiomyopathy. It was a big, scary word that meant her heart muscle was failing. It meant she was always tired. It meant she needed medicine that cost $400 every month. The medicine kept her alive. It let her work. It let her raise Grace. But the work was hard. Scrubbing floors and carrying heavy laundry buckets made her chest ache. She was falling behind. On her small apartment wall, there was one frame. It held a faded photograph of a woman in a military dress uniform, shaking hands with a president. This was General Margaret Maggie Hayes, Grace's great-aunt. the family's war hero. Grace loved stories about Aunt Maggie. Aunt Maggie never quit, Grace would say. And we don't quit either, Mama. But Emily was close to quitting. She had sold her car. She had sold her mother's wedding ring. The only thing left was a small, tarnished silver locket. One cold Tuesday, Emily woke up feeling a sharp pain in her chest. Her breath was short. She looked at her pill bottle. It was empty. She had run out 2 days ago, trying to make the prescription stretch. She had to get her refill today. She just had to. She went to work at the Bishop estate. She felt faint as she dusted the enormous, sun-filled library. Mrs. Bishop was a cold, demanding employer. She noticed every speck of dust, every minute Emily was late. As Emily polished the heavy mahogany desk, her vision swam. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. Her heart was doing a terrible, fluttering dance. I need my medicine. I need it now. She knew Mrs. Bishop was at her garden club meeting. With a shaking hand, Emily pulled open the top desk drawer. She was just looking for a cloth. But inside, beneath a stack of stationery, was a small, unsealed envelope. Written on it in neat cursive were the words, "Petty cash." Emily's heart pounded. She had never stolen a thing in her life. She thought of Grace. She thought of Aunt Maggie. The shame burned her. But the panic in her chest was stronger. If I collapse, who will take care of Grace? Her hand, as if it had a mind of its own, reached into the drawer. She pulled out the envelope. It was full of $20 bills. She quickly counted out $400. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped one. I'll pay it back, she promised herself, a desperate, silent lie. I'll pay it back. I'll skip meals. I'll ask for extra shifts. She will never know. Just what do you think you are doing? The voice was like ice. Emily whirled around. Mrs. Eleanor Bishop stood in the doorway. Her arms were crossed. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Emily dropped the money. The bills scattered on the expensive Persian rug. Mrs. Bishop, please, Emily gasped, clutching her chest. It's not. I'm sick. My heart medicine. I was just going to borrow it. I'll pay it back. Borrow. Mrs. Bishop's laugh was sharp. You are a thief, Emily. You are stealing from the very person who puts food on your table. I trusted you in my home. Please, Emily sobbed. She sank to her knees. My daughter, Grace. I don't have any money. The prescription. I am not interested in your excuses, Mrs. Bishop said. She picked up the phone on the desk. I am calling the police. We will have this sorted out properly. 10 minutes later, a police car pulled up the long, winding driveway. Emily was handcuffed in the library. She was walked out the front door, past the gardener and the cook, who stared at the floor, too ashamed to look at her. All she could think about was Grace, waiting at home, waiting for a mother who would not arrive. The news spread fast. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, found Grace alone in the apartment that evening. She called the only number taped to the fridge, General Margaret Hayes. Aunt Maggie arrived 2 hours later. She was nearly 80, small and frail, and walked with a blackthorn cane. But her eyes were the same bright, piercing blue as Grace's. They missed nothing. She was furious. She hugged Grace tightly. It's all right, child, she said, her voice rough. We've faced worse than this. Aunt Maggie hired a public defender, a tired-looking man named Ben Carter, and she took Grace in. The trial was set for Judge Arthur Vance. Aunt Maggie knew his reputation. He's a hard man, Grace, she explained, her hands gripping her cane. He was a prosecutor for 30 years. They called him the Hammer. Then he had his accident. Judge Vance's story was the town's tragedy. 3 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light. The crash killed Vance's wife, Mary, instantly. It crushed his spine. He returned to the bench 6 months later in his wheelchair. But the man who returned was not the same. The accident had taken his wife, his legs, and every last piece of mercy he might have had. He hated sad stories. He hated excuses. He believed only in the cold, hard letter of the law. And now, he was staring at Grace. The trial had been short. Mr. Fields, the prosecutor, was sharp. This is a simple case of betrayal, Your Honor. The defendant, Emily Rawlings, abused the trust of her employer. She stole $400. The law is clear. Mr. Carter, the public defender, did his best. Your Honor, this was not an act of greed. This was an act of desperation. My client has a serious heart condition. She needed medication to live. It was a choice between the law and her life. Judge Vance had listened, his face an unreadable mask. He gripped the armrests of his chair. He was about to speak. He was about to deliver his sentence. And that is when Grace had stood up. That is when she had walked to the bench. Now, she stood before him, her small promise hanging in the air. "Heal me, will you?" Judge Vance said. His voice was dangerously soft. The courtroom held its breath. "Yes, sir. Child, I have been to the best specialists in the world," the judge said. "I have been to doctors in Boston, in New York, and in Germany. They have all told me my injury is permanent. My spinal cord is damaged. It cannot be fixed. What makes you, a 10-year-old girl, think you can do what they cannot?" "Because they were trying to fix your bones," Grace said. "They weren't looking at your heart. Your heart is broken, sir. It's full of cold stone. It's what's keeping your legs from working." The judge's face went white. His knuckles turned white on the armrests. He had not spoken of his wife, Mary, in 3 years. He had locked all that pain away. How could this child see it? "I can see it," Grace said, as if answering his thought. "My Aunt Maggie says our family, we're healers. We can sense things. We fix things that are broken." Judge Vance let out a dry, harsh chuckle. It was a terrible, rusty sound. "Is that so? You will heal me, will you? And in exchange, I'll just free your mother?" He was mocking her. He was mocking this ridiculous, painful hope. "Yes," Grace said. She did not blink. "Your Honor," the prosecutor, Mr. Fields, tried again. "This is a mockery of the court." "Silence," Vance roared. He banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. He stared at Grace. This was absurd. This was madness. He was a judge. He was a man of logic. But this child was not afraid of him. And she saw his sadness. She saw the stone in his heart. He thought of the long, empty nights, the pain in his useless legs, the crushing, endless silence of his huge, empty house. What if? The thought was a poison. It was a tiny, agonizing spark. What if? He looked at Emily Rawlings. She was crying, begging her daughter to stop. He looked at the old woman in the front row, Aunt Maggie. She was watching him, her blue eyes as sharp as her great niece. She gave a single, tiny nod. Judge Vance gripped his gavel. His logical mind screamed at him to sentence the woman and have the child removed. But the part of him that had died with Mary whispered, "What do you have to lose?" "Mrs. Emily Rawlings," the judge said, his voice shaking with a strange, new emotion. "Your daughter has made an unusual proposal." He looked at Grace. "You are 10 years old. You do not understand what you are offering." "I'm 10, not stupid," Grace said. "I understand." A ripple of shock went through the room. Judge Vance actually smiled. It was a tiny, grim crack in the granite. "Very well. I am going to do something I have never done in 25 years. He leaned forward. "I am postponing your mother's sentencing for 30 days. Emily Rawlings gasped. "In that time," the judge continued, "you will come to my home. You will attempt this. Healing. You have 30 days, Miss Grace Rawlings. To make my legs work again." The prosecutor looked like he might faint. "Your Honor, this is not legal." "It is my courtroom, Mr. Fields," Vance snapped. "I am postponing the sentence." "That is legal." He then looked at Grace, and his face turned dark. "But there is a condition." His voice dropped, and the chill returned. "If this is a game, child, if this is a childish fantasy to manipulate my court, if, at the end of 30 days, nothing has changed, I will sentence your mother to the maximum allowed by law. 2 years in a state prison. No parole." Emily let out a small scream. "No, Your Honor, please. She's just a child. Don't do this. I'll plead guilty. I'll take the time. Just leave my daughter out of this." "It is too late for that," Judge Vance said. "The offer has been made, and I have accepted." He looked at Grace. "Do you understand me, child? You are gambling with your mother's freedom. 2 years. Do you accept the terms?" Grace looked at her mother, who was sobbing. She looked at her great Aunt Maggie, who was pale but resolute. Grace turned back to the judge. "I understand, sir," she said. 30 days. "Court dismissed," Judge Vance said. He banged the gavel. His motorized chair whirred, and he turned and disappeared into his chambers. Reporters rushed forward. Aunt Maggie grabbed Grace's hand and pushed through the crowd. In his chambers, Judge Vance wheeled himself to the window. He stared at the city skyline. His hands were shaking. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. He had just placed his entire legal reputation and his own secret, agonizing hope in the hands of a 10-year-old girl. He felt like a fool. But as he sat there, he realized something else. For the first time in 3 years, he was not thinking about the past. He was thinking about tomorrow. And he was terrified. The gavel's echo faded, but the chaos in the courtroom exploded. Reporters, sensing the biggest story of the year, surged toward the aisle. Cameras flashed, and shouted questions filled the air. Grace, how will you do it? Miss Hayes, is this a stunt? Is your family part of a cult? Grace felt a small hand, tough as old leather, grip hers. Head up, child, Aunt Maggie said, her voice a low command. We're soldiers. We don't look at the ground. Aunt Maggie used her blackthorn cane like a shield, tapping it on the floor to clear a path. Step aside. Step aside. The child has nothing more to say. Ben Carter, the public defender, ran interference, his tired face now pale with shock. Please, give them space. This is a 10-year-old girl. They pushed through the swinging doors and into the bright, cold hallway. The noise was only slightly muffled. Aunt Maggie, Grace said, her voice small for the first time. Is she going to be okay in there? Aunt Maggie stopped and knelt, wincing as her old knees popped. She looked her great niece square in the eye. Her blue eyes were identical to Grace's, just weathered by time and war. Your mother is a Rawlings, she said, and she is my niece. They will not break her. But, Grace, what you did in there, that was the bravest thing I have ever seen. Braver than anything I saw overseas. But what if I can't? Grace whispered. The weight of the promise, 2 years for her mother, was just beginning to land on her small shoulders. You said you could see the cold stone in his heart, Aunt Maggie said simply. Did you lie to the judge? No, Grace said, shaking her head. I can see it. It's all gray and cracked. And it hurts him. Then you know what you have to do, Aunt Maggie said. She stood up, gripping her cane. Healers in our family, we don't fix things with magic, Grace. We fix them with truth. And the truth is hard work. Now let's go. We have 30 days. A single, unmarked black car was waiting for them at a side entrance, arranged by the bailiff who clearly pitied them. As they drove away, Grace watched the news vans cluster at the front of the courthouse. She felt like she was in a very small boat in a very big, angry ocean. The next morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, Aunt Maggie's rusty 20-year-old sedan pulled up the long, winding driveway of Judge Vance's home. The house was not a home. It was a fortress. It was a massive, modern structure of gray stone and dark glass, perched on a hill overlooking the city. The landscaping was perfect, but there were no flowers. Only sharp-edged hedges and tall, lonely cypress trees. He lives here, Grace asked. It was as cold as the judge. This is what grief buys you, Aunt Maggie said, her voice sad. A big, empty box. They walked to the heavy oak door. Before they could knock, it was opened by a woman in a stiff, gray uniform. She was tall, thin, and looked like she hadn't smiled since 1980. Her name tag read, Mrs. Davies. You are expected, Mrs. Davies said. Her voice was flat, matching the house. She did not look at Grace. She addressed Aunt Maggie. The judge is in his study. This way. Do not touch anything. They followed her through a grand foyer. The floor was polished marble, and their footsteps echoed. There was no art on the walls. No photographs. There was just space and silence and the faint, sterile smell of lemon oil. Grace had never been in a house so big or so quiet. It felt like a museum, but a museum of nothing. Mrs. Davies stopped at a tall, dark wooden door. In here. I will bring tea. The judge takes his with no sugar. The child will have milk, Aunt Maggie said. Mrs. Davies' thin lips tightened, but she nodded once and walked away. Remember, Aunt Maggie whispered to Grace, you are not here to be his friend. You are here to do a job. Be respectful, but be strong. I will be right outside. Grace nodded. She took a deep breath, just as her mother had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She pushed the heavy door open and walked in. The study was enormous. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, looking out over the city. The other walls were covered, floor to ceiling, in books. But like the rest of the house, there was nothing personal. No clutter. No photographs of his wife. Judge Vance was silhouetted against the bright window. He was in his wheelchair, staring out. Close the door, he said, without turning. Grace did. The click of the latch sounded very loud. She stood in the middle of the room, her hands clasped behind her back. She waited. The judge did not speak for a long, painful minute. He was testing her, seeing if she would fidget. seeing if she would get scared and run. Grace stood still. She looked at the back of his head. Finally, he spun his wheelchair around. The electric motor whirred. His face was gray in the morning light. He looked tired. "So," he said, his voice laced with cold sarcasm. "The healer has arrived. Where is your magic wand? Your bag of potions?" "I don't have those, sir," Grace said. "What then? Are you going to lay your hands on me? Speak in tongues. Command me to rise and walk." Grace shook her head. "No, sir. I'm just going to sit." She pointed to a small, hard-backed wooden chair in the corner of the room, meant for a guest who was not welcome to stay long. "May I?" The judge was taken aback. This was not the start he expected. "Be my guest." Grace pulled the chair across the rug and placed it about 10 feet from him. Then she sat down. She put her hands in her lap, and she waited. They sat in silence. The only sound was the ticking of a large, grim grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Judge Vance stared at her. He was an expert at interrogation. He could break down hardened criminals with silence. But this 10-year-old girl just sat. She looked at him, not with pity, but with a calm, steady gaze. After 5 minutes, the judge couldn't stand it. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I'm listening," Grace said. "Listening to what?" "The clock." "To the house," Grace said. "It's very sad here. It's empty. It feels like no one has laughed in a long time." The judge's hands gripped the arms of his chair. She was right. After Mary died, he had gotten rid of everything. All her things. Her pictures. Her colorful paintings. Her laughter. He had packed it all away, thinking if he couldn't see it, it wouldn't hurt. It had not worked. "You are here to heal my legs, not analyze my home, child," he said. "It's all connected, sir," Grace said. "Your legs, and this house, and your wife." The judge's face went from gray to a deep, angry red. "You will not speak of my wife." His voice was a low, dangerous growl. "You know nothing about her. You know nothing about my pain." "That's not true," Grace said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through his anger. "I know about pain. I know what it's like to have a hole in your life. My dad left. It's not the same as dying, but it's still a hole. And my mama is in jail." She leaned forward. "Your hole is bigger, I think. It's so big you're trying to fill it up with all this cold. You think if you're cold enough, you won't feel the fire. But the fire is still there. It's just burning you from the inside out." Judge Vance was speechless. He felt as if she had peeled back his suit, his shirt, and his skin, and was looking directly at his heart. "Who taught you to say these things?" he demanded. "Was it the old woman? Your aunt?" "Aunt Maggie just says to look. And to listen," Grace said. "People tell you everything, even when they're not talking." "You're not talking, Judge, but you're screaming." Before he could respond, the door opened. Mrs. Davies entered with a silver tray. She placed a cup of tea on the judge's desk and a small glass of milk on a side table. "Will that be all, Your Honor?" she asked. The judge waved a dismissive hand. He was still staring at Grace. Mrs. Davies shot the girl a look of pure poison. This child was upsetting the order. She was disturbing the perfect, cold silence the judge had demanded for 3 years. She left, closing the door a little too hard. "Drink your milk," the judge ordered. Grace took a small sip. "You should talk about her, sir." "Talk about who?" he said, stalling. "Your wife? Mary. That was her name, wasn't it?" He flinched, as if she had struck him. "Yes." The word was torn from his throat. "Was she nice?" Grace asked. The judge looked away, out the window. "She was—" He stopped. He hadn't said the words in so long. "She was the opposite of this house. She was all color. And noise. She painted. Badly," he added, a tiny, ghost of a smile touching his lips for 1 second. "She would sing in the kitchen. Also badly." He caught himself. The granite mask slammed back down. "That is enough. This is not therapy. This is a farce. You have 29 days left, Miss Rawlings. I suggest you start your healing, or you are wasting my time and your mother's." "I did start," Grace said, standing up. "I'll be back tomorrow." "You're leaving?" He was confused. "Yes, sir. Aunt Maggie is waiting. And you're tired. The stone, it's heavy. You need to rest." She walked to the door. "Grace," he called out. She turned. "How did you know her name was Mary?" "I saw it," Grace said. "It's written on the inside of your heart. In gold." She left. Judge Arthur Vance sat alone in his silent study. The glass of milk was half full. His tea was untouched. For the first time in 3 years, he picked up the secure phone on his desk and dialed a number. "Owen," he said, his voice rough. "It's Vance. I want you to look into a woman. A war veteran. General Margaret Hayes. I want to know everything about her. Her family. Her history. Everything." He hung up. He did not know if the child was a charlatan, a lunatic, or something else. But he was a judge. He built his life on evidence. And he was going to get some. He wheeled himself over to the window and looked down at the city. He saw the rusty old sedan pull away from his house. He put his hand over his heart. It was beating, fast and hard, against his ribs. It was the most he had felt in a very, very long time. The ride back in Aunt Maggie's old car was quiet for several miles. Grace stared out the window, watching the neat, wealthy suburbs of the judge's world give way to the cracked sidewalks of their own neighborhood. Aunt Maggie gripped the wheel, her knuckles bony and white. "Well, child," she finally said, her voice rough. "You poked the bear. He was mean today," Grace said quietly. "Of course he was," Maggie said, turning a corner. "You held a mirror up to him. People who have been living in the dark don't like it when you suddenly flick on a bright light. It hurts their eyes." "He called you Maggie the Miracle," Grace said. "He was making fun of you." Aunt Maggie let out a dry chuckle. "That's an old name. Haven't heard it in 40 years. It was what the boys in my unit called me." "Why?" "Because I listened," she said, pulling up to their small apartment building. A boy would be wounded, a hole in his leg or his arm. The doctors would stitch up the hole, but the boy wouldn't heal. He'd have fevers. He'd be in pain. The doctors would be stumped. She turned off the ignition, the old car giving a final, sputtering cough. "So I'd go sit with him. I'd hold his hand. And I'd just listen. And soon, he'd start talking. He'd talk about his mother's farm, or the girl he was going to marry, or the fear, the terrible, deep fear that he'd failed his friends." She looked at Grace, her blue eyes sharp. He wasn't healing because he was scared. He was afraid to go home, or afraid he'd never be whole again. The hole in his leg was nothing. The hole in his spirit was killing him. "So you fixed the hole in his spirit," Grace whispered, understanding. "I just let him talk it out. I'd tell him, the body is a machine, son, but the heart is the engineer. That's all this is, Grace. You're just reminding the judge that his heart is still the engineer. He's just forgotten how to read the blueprints." "I think I made him too angry," Grace said, her hand on the car door. "He told me to get out." "But did you?" "No." "And are you going back tomorrow?" "Yes," Grace said, a new resolve in her voice. "I am. I have to. For Mama." That evening, Judge Vance sat alone in his vast, silent home. Mrs. Davies approached him as he sat in his study. "Will you be taking your dinner in here, Your Honor?" she asked. It was the same question she had asked every night for 3 years. He looked at her. He had hired her after the accident, specifically because she was cold and efficient. She never asked him how he was. She never showed emotion. She was as sterile as his house. Tonight, for the first time, her presence irritated him. "No, Mrs. Davies," he said, his voice startling her. "I will eat in the dining room." The housekeeper's thin eyebrows shot up. "Sir, the dining room has not been prepared." "Then prepare it," he said. "One place, at the head of the table." "As you wish, Your Honor." She turned, a flicker of disapproval on her face. This child was disrupting the routine. A few minutes later, the judge wheeled himself into the cavernous dining room. A single plate and set of silverware sat at the end of a polished mahogany table long enough to seat 20. The high-backed chairs were all empty. They looked like silent, waiting ghosts. Mrs. Davies served him a simple, flavorless meal of baked chicken and steamed vegetables. She left. The silence was deafening. He could hear the scrape of his fork on the china. It echoed. "You're screaming," the girl had said. He looked at the chair to his right. Mary's chair. She used to fill this room with stories about her garden club, about a funny dog she saw on her walk. She would argue with him about politics, about his cases. She would laugh, a loud, wonderful laugh that always made him feel young. He had silenced it all. He felt a sudden, sharp, stabbing pain in his left thigh. It was so intense, he gasped and dropped his fork. Clatter. The sound echoed, loud as a gunshot. He grabbed his leg. It was a phantom pain. The doctors had warned him about it. "Nerves," they said. "Nerves misfiring, sending signals of pain that weren't real." But this felt real. He pushed his plate away. He wheeled himself back to the study. He needed to be in control. The phone rang. He picked it up. "Your Honor," said the sharp voice of Owen Fields, the prosecutor. I have that information you requested. Go on, Vance said. It's interesting, Fields said, a little hesitant. General Margaret Hayes. She's the real deal. Decorated for valor. 2 tours. Wounded in action. She's a local legend. I don't care about her medals. What about the other? Talk, right? Fields said, shuffling papers. It's all hearsay, of course. Nothing official. But I spoke to a few people who served under her. They call her Maggie the Miracle. It was a joke, mostly. But they all had a story. A story. One guy said she sat with a soldier in a coma for 3 days, just talking to him, and he woke up. Another said a man's infected wound started healing after she laid hands on him. It's superstition, sir. Battlefield nonsense. But there's more. The family. They've been in this valley for 200 years. They have a reputation. A reputation for what? The judge snapped. For seeing things. Knowing things. The people in the countryside, they respect them. And fear them a little. They're known as healers, but not with medicine. They're folk healers. The judge's grip on the phone tightened. Folk healers. So this is a grift. A family con. It seems that way, sir, Fields said. But the mother, Emily Rawlings. She's clean. Not a single parking ticket. Her heart condition is legitimate. Very serious. The doctors at County General say she's on a waiting list for a transplant, but she's not high enough on the list. And Mrs. Bishop? Fields sighed. She's furious about the 30-day postponement. She's calling the district attorney's office every hour. She wants the maid in jail, and she wants this circus to end. Let her be furious, the judge said. This is my courtroom. Thank you, Mr. Fields. Keep digging. Find me something solid I can use. He hung up. A family of con artists. Maggie the Miracle. His anger returned, cold and sharp. He was being played. The child wasn't a healer. She was a performer. She had heard the town gossip about his wife, about his grief, and she and that old woman had spun a tale. They were preying on his weakness, using his personal tragedy to free their criminal relative. He felt a hot, burning shame. He, Judge Arthur Vance, the hammer, was being manipulated by a 10-year-old. Tomorrow, he thought, I will end this. The next morning, day 2, Grace felt the coldness as soon as the door opened. Mrs. Davies looked at her with open contempt. He is waiting, and he is not in a good mood, I assure you. Good morning, Mrs. Davies, Grace said politely. The housekeeper just sniffed and led her to the study. This time, the judge was not at the window. He was behind his massive desk. He was wearing his black judge's robes, even though it wasn't a court day. He looked like he was about to pass sentence. Sit down, Miss Rawlings, he commanded. Grace sat in the small wooden chair. I have been doing research, the judge said, his voice stripped of all emotion. On your family, your great-aunt, Maggie the Miracle. A long family reputation for folk healing. This is quite a performance you two have staged. Grace just looked at him. This is a manipulation, the judge continued, his voice rising. You are using my personal tragedy, gossip you heard in town, to try and free your mother. You come into my home and you speak of my wife. You have the audacity to analyze my grief. You are a fraud, young lady. And this game is over. Grace waited until he was finished. The air in the room was brittle. Do you have any pictures of her? Grace asked. The judge froze. His angry tirade hit a wall. What? Your wife? Mary, do you have any pictures of her in this house? That is none of your business. I had them stored. It was too difficult. Then you're a liar, sir, Grace said, her voice clear and strong. The judge's face went purple. How dare you speak to me that way? I am a judge of the Superior Court. You're a liar, Grace repeated, standing up. You said I was using your tragedy, but you're the one using it. You're using it like a big, cold blanket. You're hiding under it. You're using it to be mean to everyone, and to make this house sad, and to keep your legs from working. My legs are not working because my spine was severed, he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. It is a medical fact, is it? Grace asked. Her voice was not challenging. It was genuinely curious. Or is that just the story you've been telling yourself? Aunt Maggie says the body believes whatever the heart tells it. And your heart, it told your body to stop. When she died, you stopped. You didn't want to walk in a world where she wasn't. So you just stopped. The judge was shaking. He couldn't breathe. This was too much. This child was seeing the exact, secret, terrible truth he had hidden even from himself. "Get out," he whispered. "Sir, get out," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Now, the deal is off. It's over. I'll have the bailiff call your aunt. Your mother will be sentenced tomorrow at 9 a.m. 2 years. You failed." Grace's heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment. She could run, or she could fight. She thought of her mother's pale face behind the glass. "No," she said. The judge stopped, stunned. "What did you say?" "No, I'm not leaving. You made a promise in your courtroom. You said 30 days. You have 28 days left. You are a judge. You have to keep your promise." "I am a judge," he yelled. "And I am telling you to leave my home." "You're not a judge right now," Grace said, taking one step closer. "You're just a very scared man. You're scared of a picture. You're scared of a memory. You're scared of her." "I am not scared," he boomed. "Then prove it," Grace said. "Show me one. Show me one picture of Mary." A terrible, vibrating silence filled the room. The judge was breathing hard, his chest hitching. He was in a battle with himself. The judge, the cold man of law, was fighting the grieving, broken husband. Finally, the husband won. "The attic," he whispered, his voice broken. He looked away, ashamed. "Mrs. Davies. She packed everything. She put it all in the attic. In a blue trunk. This house has an elevator, doesn't it?" Grace asked softly. "Yes." "Then let's go," she said. "We'll go together. Right now." The judge looked at her. At this impossible, stubborn, 10-year-old child. He was terrified. He had not been to the 3rd floor since the funeral. It was where her art studio had been. It was where she had been. I can't," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said in 3 years. Grace walked over to his wheelchair. She didn't touch it. She just stood beside it, a small, blonde soldier. "Yes, you can," she said. "I'll help you." He stared at the door. It was a million miles away. "You can waste today," Grace said, "but I'm coming back tomorrow. And the day after. I'm not quitting. Not until you stop being afraid. Or until my 28 days are up." She turned and walked to the door. "Think about it, sir. Please." She left. Judge Arthur Vance sat in his robes, in his fortress of a study. He was furious. He was humiliated. And he was thoughtful. He slowly wheeled himself out of the study. He went down the cold, marble hallway. He stopped at the polished silver doors of the residential elevator. He stared at the button that said 3. He could not press it. He wheeled himself back to his study, defeated. But as he sat, staring at the empty wall, he knew. He knew she would be back tomorrow. And he knew, sooner or later, he would have to go to the attic. That afternoon, Grace and Aunt Maggie went to the county jail. It was visiting day. They sat in the loud, concrete room, filled with crying families. They waited. Emily Rawlings was brought out. She sat behind the thick, scratched glass partition. She picked up the plastic phone. She looked pale and thin. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Oh, Grace. Maggie," she said, her voice tinny over the receiver. "What is happening? The women in here, they're talking about it. They're all calling me the miracle worker's mom. They think it's a joke." "It's not a joke, Mama," Grace said, pressing her hand to the glass. "Grace, honey, you have to stop this," Emily pleaded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "This man, Judge Vance, he's cruel. He's playing a game with you. He's going to wait his 30 days, and then he's going to send me to prison just to prove a point. He's going to hurt you, baby." "He's not," Grace said. "He's just broken. I can fix him." "You can't fix him," Emily sobbed, her voice rising. "He's not a broken doll. He's a broken man. Please, Maggie, talk to her. Stop this. I'll just take the sentence. I'll do the 2 years. It's better than him hurting you." Aunt Maggie leaned forward, picking up her own receiver. "Emily," she said, her voice full of steel. "You look at me. We are not a family of quitters. Grace has made a bargain. We will see it through. Your job is to stay strong. Our job is to get you out." "Time's up," a board guard called out. Emily was led away. She looked back, her face a mask of love and pure terror. Grace kept her hand on the cold glass long after her mother was gone. She felt the chill seep into her bones. 2 years. The judge's threat. It wasn't a game. It was real. She looked at her great-aunt. "Tomorrow," Grace said, her voice low. "Tomorrow, I'm going to make him go to that attic. I have to." The next morning, day 3, Grace arrived at the fortress of Greystone. She felt a cold pit of fear in her stomach. What if he had called the guards? What if he refused to let her in? But the heavy oak door opened. Mrs. Davies stood there, her face tighter than a drum. "He is in the foyer," she said, her voice a low hiss of disapproval. She clearly knew of yesterday's argument. Grace walked into the echoing marble hall. Judge Vance was there, as promised, in his wheelchair. He was not in his robes. He wore a simple gray sweater. He looked as if he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale and drawn. He did not say good morning. He simply stared at the silver elevator doors. "You're here," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Grace said, standing a few feet away. "You and your aunt. You are cruel people," he whispered, not looking at her. "You are digging up bones that should be left buried." "They're not bones, sir," Grace said softly. "They're just memories. And they're not buried. You've just locked them in a room. You're the one who's been their jailer." The judge let out a short, harsh breath. He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain so deep it made Grace's chest ache. "You have no idea what you are asking." "I'm not asking," Grace said. "You're the one who has to decide. I have 28 days left. We can sit here, or we can go." The judge stared at the elevator button. The small, round 3 seemed to mock him. He could feel the sweat on his palms. His heart was pounding, a panicked bird in his ribs. He felt dizzy. I can't go up there. She can't make me." He looked at this 10-year-old girl. She was not a con artist. He knew that now. She was not a fraud. She was something else. She was a mirror, and he hated what he saw. But he also knew, with a terrible, dawning certainty, that she was right. He had stopped. He had stopped living. He was a ghost in his own home. "If I do this," he said, his voice a rasp, "and nothing changes, you will be responsible for what happens to your mother. I will not show mercy." "I know," Grace said. With a trembling, spasming hand, Judge Arthur Vance reached out. He pressed the button. A quiet ding sounded. The silver doors slid open. The ride up was the longest 30 seconds of the judge's life. The elevator was smooth and silent. Grace stood in the corner, her hands behind her back. The judge stared at himself in the polished steel of the door. He saw a gray, old, broken man. The doors opened again. Ding. They were on the 3rd floor. This hall was different. A large skylight made the space bright and airy. And at the end of the hall, there was a single white door. Mary's studio. He wheeled himself forward, the rubber tires silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped in front of the door. "It's locked," he whispered, a strange relief in his voice. "Mrs. Davies. She must have the key. I do not." Grace looked at the doorknob. "No, it's not," she said. She reached out, her small hand covering his on the doorknob. "You're just afraid to turn it." She was right. He hadn't tried. "Together," she said. He wrapped his fingers around the cold brass. Grace put her hand over his. Together, they turned. Click. The latch opened. Grace pushed the door. It swung open with a soft whoosh, disturbing the air inside for the first time in 3 years. Sunlight poured into the room. It was not a dark, spooky attic. It was a beautiful, open space with a sloped ceiling and a massive, floor-to-ceiling window. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny, golden angels. The room was filled with her. Her scent, a faint, lingering smell of lavender and turpentine. Her canvases were stacked against the wall, some finished, some only sketched out. Her easels stood like lonely sentinels. Her smocks, splattered with bright blues and yellows, hung from hooks on the wall. And in the center of the room, clean and neat, was the blue trunk. It was a large, bright, robin's egg blue trunk. Mary had loved that color. Judge Vance wheeled himself into the center of the room. He could not breathe. He was suffocating. I can't," he choked, trying to back the chair up. "Yes, you can," Grace said. She walked over to the trunk and knelt beside it. She ran her hand over the smooth, painted lid. What was her favorite color? The judge stopped. The question was so simple. "This one," he said, his voice thick. This blue. She wanted to paint our front door this color. I told her it was undignified. We fought about it. The day before the accident." A single, hot tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away, furious. "She sounds fun," Grace said. "She was," he whispered. "She was chaos. She was everything I am not." He looked at the trunk. "I told Mrs. Davies to get rid of it. To donate it. She didn't listen." "Maybe she knew you'd need it," Grace said. She looked at the 2 brass latches. "I can't open this. My hands aren't strong enough." It was a lie. They both knew it. She was giving him the choice. He stared at the latches. This was it. This was the grave. He could open it, or he could will himself back to his cold, stone life. He thought of the girl's words. You're a jailer. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely control them. He wheeled forward. He leaned down, the position awkward and painful. His fingers fumbled with the first latch. It was stiff. He grunted, pulling at it. Snap. It flew open. He moved to the second. His heart was hammering. He could hear his wife's laughter. Oh, Arthur, don't be such a stuffed shirt. Snap. The second latch opened. He sat back up, breathing hard. He stared at the lid. Go on, sir, Grace urged, her voice gentle. He put his hands on the lid. He paused. He took a deep breath. He lifted it. The smell of lavender and old perfume washed over him. So powerful, it was like a physical blow. He gasped. Inside, right on top, was a bright red, knitted scarf. Mary had always been cold. His hand, of its own accord, reached in. He picked up the scarf. It was soft. He buried his face in it. And the dam broke. It was not a loud, wailing cry. It was a silent, agonizing collapse. The judge's shoulders shook. He made no sound. The tears streamed from his closed eyes, disappearing into the red wool. 3 years of grief, of rage, of guilt, of unbearable, suffocating loneliness. It all came pouring out. He wept for the argument about the door. He wept for the stupid, meaningless things he'd said. He wept for the last time he'd seen her, rushing out of the house, annoyed. He wept for the silence. Grace did not move. She did not pat his shoulder. She did not offer him false comfort. She just sat on the floor, cross-legged, and bore witness. She let him grieve. She held the space for him, a small, 10-year-old anchor in his storm of pain. He wept for a long, long time. As his sobs finally began to quiet, he was still clutching the scarf. And then, he felt it. It was not the familiar, dull phantom ache. It was a sharp, stinging, shocking pain in his left foot. It felt like a needle, a hot poker. Ack, he cried out, dropping the scarf and grabbing his leg. What is it? Grace asked, her eyes wide. A spasm, he panted, rubbing his thigh. A bad one. It's fading. But it wasn't a spasm. He knew it. A spasm was a muscle contracting. This was a feeling. This was a nerve, somewhere deep in the wreckage of his spine, firing. He stared at his useless, tweed-covered leg. It hurt, he said, bewildered. It actually hurt. He looked at Grace. Her face was calm. Good, she said. The stone is cracking. The fire is getting out. He looked at the trunk again. Beneath the scarf, he saw the edge of a small, square canvas. He reached in, his hand still trembling, and pulled it out. It was a painting. A bad painting, just as he'd said. The colors were too bright. The perspective was all wrong. It was a painting of their garden. But in the corner, Mary had painted him. He was in his suit, reading a book, and he was smiling. He had not seen himself smile in 3 years. He held the painting. He looked at Grace. Tomorrow, he said, his voice raw. Come back tomorrow. Grace came back. Day 4. Day 5. Day 10. The judge was a man possessed. He had called his old physical therapist, a no-nonsense man named Dr. Evans. Judge Vance, Dr. Evans said, walking into the judge's home gym for the first time in 2 years. I told you, there is nothing more I can do. The nerve damage is permanent. You told me I had no motivation, doctor, the judge snapped. He was on the therapy table. I am motivated now. So, do your job. For 2 hours every morning, before Grace arrived, the judge would fight. Dr. Evans would move the judge's legs, stretching the atrophied muscles. Push against me, Arthur, he would command. The judge would grunt, his face purple with strain. He would try to make his leg move. Nothing. Again. I am trying, the judge roared, slamming his fist on the mat. It's not working. Your anger won't fix it, the doctor said. When Grace arrived in the afternoon, she would find him exhausted, furious, and defeated. They would sit in the study. But the study was different. The small, bad painting of the garden now sat on his desk. It's not working, he told her on day 15. I'm doing the work. I'm feeling the grief. I'm trying. Nothing. It's all for nothing. You're not trying, Grace said, looking at him. What? He said, insulted. I am in agony every single day. You're not trying, she repeated. You're commanding. You're sitting on your bench, in your head, and you're banging your gavel, telling your legs to rise. You're trying to sentence them to walk. But they're not criminals, sir. They're just sad. Like you. The judge stared at her. You're not a judge in that, Jim, she said. You're just a man. You have to ask them. You have to. You have to forgive them. And you have to forgive yourself. For the accident. It wasn't your fault. The judge looked away. He had never admitted it. He had been driving. He had been driving. The drunk driver had hit his side of the car, but the impact had killed Mary. He had lived. She had died. The guilt was the true paralysis. It should have been me, he whispered. But it wasn't, Grace said. And she wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you in this chair, in this cold house. She'd want you to paint the front door blue. A small, watery smile touched the judge's lips. She would, wouldn't she? He looked at his hands. Forgive them. That night, alone in his bed, the judge did not try to push. He did not command. He lay in the dark, and he talked. Mary, he whispered to the empty room. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I want to walk again. I want to walk in the sun, like you said. He remembered the letter. The one he'd found in the trunk, the one she'd written for their anniversary, the one he was supposed to read after she. No, he hadn't read it. He'd put it away. He hadn't found a letter. Grace had said that. Don't let my death be the end of your life. Please, walk in the sun for me. Wait. He hadn't found that letter. Grace had said. No, that wasn't right. What had she said? His memory was foggy. He lay there. Please, he whispered to his legs. It wasn't your fault. It was mine. But I'm done. I'm done being cold. Please, come back. He concentrated. He thought of the red scarf. He thought of her bad painting. He thought of her laugh. And under the blankets, his left toe moved. Just a twitch. A tiny, insignificant flicker. He gasped. He tried again. Nothing. He laughed. A real, actual, rusty laugh. It was a start. Day 29. The day before the deadline. The judge was in his study when the phone rang. He had dismissed Mrs. Davies 2 weeks prior. A new, cheerful-looking housekeeper was arranging flowers in the foyer. Flowers. He picked up. Vance. Your Honor, said Owen Fields, the prosecutor. He sounded agitated. You need to turn on the news. Mrs. Eleanor Bishop is holding a press conference. She's on the courthouse steps. She's accusing you of judicial misconduct. She's saying you're being manipulated by a child faith healer, and that this entire 30-day period has been a circus. She's demanding your recusal and a new trial for Emily Rawlings. The judge was silent. He looked across the desk at Grace, who was reading a book. Your Honor, did you hear me? Fields asked. This is bad. The media is eating it up. Thank you, Mr. Fields, the judge said calmly. But it doesn't matter what she says. I've already made my decision about Mrs. Rawlings. But, sir, your reputation. My reputation is my own concern, the judge said, and hung up. He looked at Grace. The woman, your mother's employer. She's trying to have me removed from the case. Grace looked up from her book. Does that mean the deal is off? She asked, her voice small. No, the judge said. He smiled. A deal is a deal. He wheeled himself to the window, which was open. The smell of fresh-cut grass filled the room. You've done what you promised, Grace, he said. You fixed the stone. You healed my heart. He turned to face her. But I'm still in this chair. Are you, sir? Grace asked, closing her book. Judge Arthur Vance looked at the small, 10-year-old girl. He looked at the painting on his desk. He thought of his wife. He put his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair. He took a deep breath. He pushed. His body shook with the strain. His face turned red. A low groan escaped his lips. It was agonizing. The muscles, dormant for so long, screamed in protest. He got one foot flat on the floor, then the other. He gripped the edge of his massive mahogany desk. He pulled. He was sweating. He was shaking. And he stood up. He was unsteady. He was trembling from head to toe. He was leaning heavily on the desk. But he was on his own 2 feet. Grace stood up, too. Her eyes filled with tears. You're standing, she whispered. Yes, the judge panted, his voice thick with emotion and effort. I am. Day 30. The courtroom was a zoo. It was standing room only. Mrs. Bishop was in the front row, looking smug, flanked by a high-priced lawyer. Owen Fields looked like he was going to be sick. At the defendant's table, Emily Rawlings was crying silently. Aunt Maggie sat behind her, straight as a rod, her eyes fixed on the judge's door. All rise, the bailiff called out. The side door to the judge's chambers opened. First, a bailiff entered, pushing the judge's empty wheelchair. He parked it next to the bench. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Then, the judge appeared. Judge Arthur Vance walked. He was using 2 black canes. Each step was a visible, painful, deliberate effort. He was drenched in sweat, his robes clinging to him. But he was walking. Tap, step, tap, step. The sound echoed in the dead silent room. People were standing, their mouths open. Mrs. Bishop looked like she had seen a ghost. Owen Field's jaw was on the floor. Emily Rawlings let out a sob. Oh my God. It took the judge a full minute to cross the room and climb the single step to his bench. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He sat down, breathing heavily. He banged his gavel. Be seated. He stared down at the courtroom. We are here for the sentencing of Mrs. Emily Rawlings. He looked at Emily. You stole $400. The law is clear. It was an act of theft. Mrs. Bishop smiled. However, the judge continued, his voice booming with its old authority. The law also allows for mercy, especially when an act is born not of greed, but of desperation. A desperation to live. A desperation to care for a child. He looked at Mrs. Bishop. I find that prison serves no purpose here. He turned back to Emily. Mrs. Rawlings, I sentence you to time served and 500 hours of community service to be served at the county hospital's cardiac ward. Emily collapsed in tears of relief. But Your Honor, Mrs. Bishop sputtered, standing up. She's a criminal. She is a mother, Judge Vance said, his eyes like cold steel. And as for the victim, I have here a cashier's check from an anonymous donor for $400. Mrs. Bishop, you have been made whole. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned. An hour later, Grace, her mother, and Aunt Maggie were walking out the front doors, free. They were swarmed by reporters, but they just pushed through. Judge Vance was waiting by his car. He leaned on one cane. Grace, he said. Grace stopped. Judge. The house, he said. I'm selling it. It's too big. He smiled, a real, warm smile. I'm going to buy a small place. With a garden. And I'm going to paint the front door blue. I'd like that, Grace said, smiling back. You didn't heal me, child, he said, his voice thick. You reminded me how. You gave me a reason to stand up. You were always strong, sir, Grace said. You just forgot. She turned to leave with her mother. Miss Hayes, the judge called out. Aunt Maggie turned, her bright blue eyes assessing him. Your great niece, the judge said. She's a truly remarkable person. Aunt Maggie tapped her cane on the pavement. She looked at the judge, standing tall on his own 2 feet. Takes one to know one, Judge, she said. Takes one to know one. They walked away, a family, whole again. Judge Vance watched them go. He looked up at the sun, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt its warmth. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.